When my son asked for my life savings, I gave it without hesitation. When he got married without me, I was heartbroken. But when he called a month later demanding I pay his overdue mortgage, well, before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. My answer to him was the one thing he never saw coming, and it changed everything. The slam of a car door cut through the quiet evening air, as loud and sudden as a gunshot right outside my house. It was 7:30 on a Tuesday, and the sharp click of my son Brandon's dress shoes on my porch steps echoed with the frantic rhythm of an angry woodpecker. I opened the front door to see his face, a mess of streaks and raw emotion. Tears had carved paths down his dust-stained cheeks, and he clutched a pile of glossy wedding magazines against his chest, as if they were a life raft. "Mommy, I need you to save my wedding." There was no hello, no apology for showing up unannounced. Just a wave of pure desperation wrapped in a designer suit, standing in my doorway while the humid Ohio heat pressed in from behind him. "Brandon, what is it? What's wrong?" I asked, trying to calm the frantic energy radiating from him. "Slow down." The venue, he pushed past me into the living room, his voice cracking under the strain. "They need $40,000 by Friday, or we lose it all. Everything, Mommy. Everything." The worn fabric of my favorite armchair groaned as I sank into it, my eyes falling on the bills scattered across the coffee table, now completely forgotten. The single lamp in the corner cast long, dancing shadows across the room, and the air conditioner hummed its low, steady song in the background. Brandon paced between the couch and the front window, his breathing shallow and quick. $40,000. The number felt like a punch to the gut, a douse of ice-cold water that stole my breath. "Brandon, honey, that's everything I have saved," I whispered. "I know," he choked out, collapsing into the chair across from me. The wedding magazines tumbled from his grasp, spilling across the worn rug in a cascade of perfect smiles and fairy tale settings. "I never, ever wanted to ask you for something like this, but Mommy, this is my one day. The one day that's going to matter for the rest of my life." His voice fractured on the last word, and in that instant, he was no longer a 3-5-year-old man. He was my 8-year-old boy again, standing in this very same living room after falling off his bike, looking at me with wide, tearful eyes, believing I could fix anything in the entire world. My hands trembled slightly as he handed me a glossy brochure showcasing magnificent crystal chandeliers and towering marble columns. "The Grandview Manor?" he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. "It's perfect, Mommy. Chloe and I went last month, and I could just picture it, walking down that aisle in my best suit, seeing you smiling at me from the front row." My late husband David's voice echoed in my memory, as clear as if he were standing beside me. "Never let our boy down, Sarah, whatever he needs." "But sweetheart, your savings, what happened?" Brandon's tears started to fall in earnest now, the heavy, shoulder-shaking kind. "The new marketing contracts at my firm dried up, and Chloe's been between jobs for 3 months. We've been living on credit cards, just hoping something would turn around." The expensive paper of the brochure felt heavy in my arthritic fingers. $40,000, my entire emergency fund, scraped together penny by penny over 15 years of careful, quiet living. It was money I had always planned to leave him anyway, but not like this, not in a desperate rush. "You said you'd always be there for me," he continued, his voice barely a whisper. "When Daddy died, you promised me nothing would change between us, Mommy." He only called me Mommy when he needed something truly important, a fact we both knew well. The childhood name was a key, a practiced incantation designed to unlock any resistance I might still have. I looked at the photos in the brochure again, the soaring ceilings, the gardens that looked like they were plucked from a storybook. It was the kind of place where dreams were supposed to come true. Then I looked at my son's desperate, tear-streaked face, at the designer watch on his wrist that cost more than my monthly budget for groceries. And at the fragile hope flickering behind his tears, the air conditioner clicked off, plunging the room into an abrupt, heavy silence. "When is the wedding?" I asked, my voice feeling distant. "June 28th. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. 6 weeks. Just enough time to make it perfect if we can just lock down the venue. 6 weeks. My mind raced, calculating. My social security, my small pension, the little bit of interest from David's life insurance. I could make it work. I always found a way to make it work. My shoulders slumped as the decision settled over me, heavy and final. "Okay," I said softly. "Okay." Brandon's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "I'll get you the money." He launched himself from his chair, almost toppling the coffee table in his haste to get to me. His arms wrapped around my neck, and for a fleeting moment, he smelled just like the little boy who used to fall asleep on my lap during Saturday morning cartoons. "I love you so much, Mommy," he murmured into my hair. "You're saving my entire life." Just as quickly as they had begun, his tears vanished. He kissed my forehead, gathered his scattered magazines, and moved toward the door with a sudden burst of renewed energy. "I'll swing by tomorrow morning to get the money," he called over his shoulder. "Early, around 9:30. I have to get to the venue by 11 to finalize all the paperwork." The front door closed behind him, leaving me alone, staring at the glossy brochures of a life I wasn't living. Outside, the engine of his sports car roared to life, and then faded down the street, taking with it the last of my savings, and a piece of my peace I didn't know I'd never get back. The next morning, pale light streamed through the living room windows, illuminating the wedding brochures still scattered exactly where Brandon had left them 13 hours earlier. I hadn't touched them. I hadn't slept much, either. I'd spent most of the night at my kitchen table, surrounded by bank statements and my old calculator, nursing 3 cups of coffee that had long gone cold as I ran the numbers over and over again. His car pulled into the driveway at precisely 9 o'clock, a full 30 minutes early. Through the kitchen window, I watched Brandon check his reflection in the rearview mirror before striding up the walkway with the unmistakable confidence of someone who knows they've already won. "Morning, Mommy." He breezed through the front door, which I'd left unlocked for him. He found me still, in my old pajamas and terry cloth robe. "Ready for the big day?" he asked, as if withdrawing my entire life savings was a cause for some grand celebration. "Let me get dressed first," I mumbled, but he was already making himself at home in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone with the effortless ease of someone half my age. "Take your time," he said without looking up. "I'll just wait here." The old safe was in my bedroom, tucked behind my dresser, and hidden beneath David's old jewelry box. My stiff, arthritic fingers fumbled with the combination his birthday, the same as it always was. From the kitchen, Brandon's cheerful, impatient voice drifted in. "Mommy, is everything okay in there?" "Fine, sweetheart. Just counting," I called back. 400. Crisp $100 bills. I'd withdrawn them the previous afternoon from 3 different banks, not wanting to raise any red flags or have to explain to a single teller why Sarah Collins suddenly needed her entire emergency fund in cash. The bills felt foreign in my weathered hands, more money than I had ever held at one time in my entire life. Back in the kitchen, Brandon watched me count out the money with an excitement he barely tried to conceal. His foot tapped a rapid rhythm against the old linoleum floor. In time with his thumbs flying across his phone screen, someone was messaging him constantly. Chloe, probably, wanting an update on the timeline. "So, when exactly is the ceremony?" I asked, arranging the bills into neat stacks on my worn kitchen table. "What church are you two using?" "Oh, Mommy." He waved a hand dismissively, his eyes glued to the stacks of cash. "So many details still up in the air. The venue handles most of that coordination stuff. That's what makes them worth every single penny. And the guest list. How many people are we talking about? Medium-sized? he said vaguely. Nothing too extravagant. Another buzz from his phone drew his attention. He glanced at it, typed a quick reply, then looked back at me with a practiced, patient smile. You worry too much about the small stuff. That's what wedding planners are for. I finished the final count. $40,000, exactly. Brandon's fingers twitched toward the large manila envelope I'd prepared, but he managed to restrain himself while I double-checked the amount. There, I said, sliding the envelope across the table. Every cent. He snatched it with both hands, clutching it to his chest as if he feared I might suddenly change my mind. You're the best mother in the world, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I really mean that. The hug he gave me felt rushed and distracted. Over his shoulder, I caught a glimpse of the back seat of his car through the kitchen window. It was packed with overnight bags and suitcases. Strange. He hadn't said anything about traveling. Are you going somewhere after the venue meeting? I asked as he pulled away. What? He followed my gaze. Oh, those. Chloe and I are thinking about a little weekend getaway before the wedding planning gets too insane. You know, one last chance to just relax. He kissed my cheek, the envelope now safely tucked inside his briefcase, and headed for the door with the same frantic energy that had brought him here the night before. There was no lingering conversation, no offer to share a cup of coffee, no time to discuss the precious mother-son moments I had already started imagining since I'd agreed to fund his dream. I'll call you later with updates, he shouted from the driveway. And just like that, he was gone, speeding away fast enough to kick up a spray of gravel from my unpaved drive. I stood on the porch, watching his taillights disappear down the road. A strange mix of pride and an inexplicable hollowness washing over me. It felt like I had just given away something far more valuable than money. The morning air was already thick, with a syrupy humidity that promised another brutal summer day. I went back inside and sat down in my leather armchair, picking up one of the wedding brochures he'd left behind. For the first time, I truly studied the pictures. The marble floors, the cascading crystal chandeliers, the gardens that looked like something out of a movie. $40,000 worth of perfect, I told myself. Whatever made my Brandon happy was worth it. By 2:30 that afternoon, the house felt cavernously quiet. I needed fresh air, some space to process everything that had just happened. I carried the wedding brochure out to the back deck, along with an old photo album I'd retrieved from the hall closet. One I hadn't brought myself to open since David's funeral 3 years ago. The old wooden deck chair creaked under my weight, its surface weathered and bleached by years of Ohio summers. Above me, the massive oak tree David had planted the year Brandon was born offered a circle of blessed shade, its leaves rustling in a slight breeze that was the only relief from the oppressive heat. Cicadas buzzed their endless, droning summer song as I opened the album to pages I knew by heart. There he was, 8-year-old Brandon in the backyard, wrapped in one of David's old white bed sheets that trailed behind him like a majestic wedding cape. In the photo, he'd made me play the bride for his favorite action figure. We were both kneeling in the soft grass while he performed an elaborate ceremony he'd completely invented on the spot. When I grow up, you'll walk me down the aisle, Mommy, he had announced with solemn importance that day. And I'll have the most handsome suit and the biggest cake in the world. David had been watching from the kitchen window, laughing at our son's theatrical performance. Later that evening, over dinner, he had whispered to me, "Mark my words, Sarah. That boy is going to have the wedding of the century someday." I turned the pages slowly, each photograph a small window into Brandon's life. At age 10, he was mesmerized by a royal wedding on our old television, sketching tuxedo designs on notebook paper. At 16, he was cutting pictures from bridal magazines and pasting them into a scrapbook he kept hidden under his bed. At 22, He was bringing home different girlfriends to our family dinners, and with each one, I wondered if she would be the one to finally deserve him. The old rope swing I'd built when he was 7 still hung from the oak's lowest branch. The rope was frayed now, and the wooden seat had weathered to a soft gray. Brandon used to spend hours on it, pumping his little legs, trying to swing high enough to touch the clouds. "Higher, Mommy. Push me higher." Those were the days when dreams felt as simple and attainable as reaching for the sky. My iced tea had grown warm in the heat. The ice cubes melted down to tiny slivers. 3 hours had passed since Brandon drove away with my life savings. Yet I felt a deep, profound satisfaction. What else was I really saving that money for? A bigger house I didn't need? Fancy dinners I would just eat alone? Trips to places that would feel empty and colorless without David by my side? The wedding venue brochure lay open on my lap, its glossy pages displaying elegant ballrooms and perfectly manicured gardens. I could so clearly picture Brandon there, handsome in a dark suit, walking down an aisle lined with flowers as I escorted him toward a lifetime of happiness. The image filled me with a warmth that fought back against the nagging memory of his rushed departure and his evasive answers about the ceremony details. Wedding stress, I reassured myself. Grooms get overwhelmed trying to plan their perfect day. That's what mothers were for, to provide stability, support, and whatever financial help they could manage. A lawnmower roared to life somewhere down the street, its steady drone mixing with the cicadas and the distant hum of air conditioners working overtime. The neighborhood had changed so much since Brandon's childhood. The house where he used to play with the Morrison kids now belonged to a young couple with no children of their own. The little corner store where I used to buy him ice cream cones had become a cell phone repair shop. But some things, I thought, remained constant. A mother's love. Family loyalty. The promise to be there when it mattered most. I closed the photo album as the shadows began to stretch and lengthen across the yard, heralding the approach of evening. Tomorrow, I decided, I would call Brandon to ask about suit shopping. Maybe offer to help with some of the other wedding preparations. For now, though, I just wanted to savor this feeling, the feeling of having done right by my son, of honoring the promise I'd made to David all those years ago. A deep contentment settled over me like the shade of the old oak tree, protective, comforting, and complete. I headed inside to start making dinner, already planning our next conversation, completely unaware that Brandon would avoid my calls for the next 8 weeks, and that my contentment was about to shatter into a million pieces I would never be able to put back together. 3 days passed before I finally reached for the phone. It was a Wednesday morning, May 19th. My coffee was cooling in my favorite mug, and the wedding magazines were still scattered across my kitchen table where Brandon had left them. The old landline felt unusually heavy in my arthritic hand. "Brandon, honey. It's your mom. I was just thinking about suit shopping." "Oh, Mommy." His voice on the other end was breathless and distracted. "So much stress with the caterer right now. They're trying to change our entire menu at the last minute. Can I call you back?" He never did. By the first week of June, my little notebook had a list of 5 unanswered calls recorded in my careful, looping handwriting. Each attempt followed the same frustrating pattern. I would dial his number around lunchtime, listen to it ring 3 times, and then hear Brandon's cheerful, hurried voice, explaining why he couldn't possibly talk. Venue problems. Chloe's work schedule. Family drama on her side of the family. "Honey, do you need help with anything else?" I asked during my 6th call. "Music? Flowers? I could drive up." "Everything's handled, Mommy. You've already done enough." The line went dead before I could even respond. June 20th marked 8 weeks of this strange, one-sided dance. The wedding was supposedly just 8 days away, yet I still knew nothing concrete. Not the name of the church, not the time of the ceremony, not even a rough estimate of the number of guests. Whenever I gently pressed Brandon for details, his voice would become small and evasive. "When exactly is the ceremony, sweetie? I need to get my dress cleaned." We're still finalizing the date," he'd stammer. "Chloe's work schedule is just so unpredictable right now, and her mother has been—" The line would crackle with static. "Sorry, Mommy. Bad connection. I'll call you tomorrow." But tomorrow never came. The heat shimmers danced above my backyard as July settled over Ohio like a suffocatingly heavy blanket. The old rope swing David had built for Brandon hung motionless in the still, heavy air, its frayed edges a stark reminder of promises kept and trust that had been freely given. Inside, my phone remained stubbornly, painfully silent. My neighbor, Helen Jenkins, found me on my back porch one Tuesday evening, staring into the distance while the ice in my sweet tea melted into a lukewarm pool. "Wedding stress finally getting to you, Sarah?" she asked kindly. I had told her all about Brandon's big day back in May, bursting with all the pride a mother could feel. Now, the words felt foreign and hollow in my mouth. "He's just been too busy to talk," I said, my voice sounding empty even to my own ears. "I haven't heard from him in 2 weeks." Helen's weathered face creased with genuine concern. "Is that normal for grooms these days?" "I wouldn't know," I admitted. "I've never had a son get married before. Maybe you should just drive up there," she suggested gently. "Check on him." The suggestion hung between us like heat lightning on the horizon. Dangerous and inevitable. I had been thinking the exact same thing for days but hadn't wanted to admit it to myself. What kind of mother shows up unannounced just because her grown son won't return her calls? The kind whose entire life savings had vanished into a black hole of wedding preparations she had never even seen. July 15th arrived with temperatures pushing toward triple digits. I made my final attempt to contact him that morning, sitting in my kitchen with the phone pressed tight against my ear, listening to it ring once, twice, 3 times, before Brandon's recorded voice cheerfully invited me to leave a message. "This is ridiculous," I said to the machine, my voice sharp with frustration. "Call me back or I'm coming over." Silence stretched through the long afternoon like pulled taffy, broken only by the mechanical wheeze of the air conditioner and the distant drone of traffic on the highway. By evening, I had checked the phone 3 times just to make sure it was working properly. The steady dial tone seemed to mock me with its persistence. A cold knot had settled in my stomach over the past week. It wasn't worry anymore. It was a growing, sickening certainty that my son was deliberately avoiding me. The same boy who used to call me every Tuesday without fail, just to share silly workplace gossip, was now treating me like a persistent bill collector. Standing at my kitchen window, I watched the sun sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in angry shades of orange and violet that mirrored the betrayal brewing in my heart. My truck keys hung by the door, silver against the dark wood grain, waiting for a decision I had been avoiding for 8 long weeks. The highway to Columbus stretched east from my small town of Willow Creek, carrying families toward reunions and mothers toward answers they might not want to find. 4 days of wrestling with indecision finally ended on a Saturday morning when I pulled my truck keys from the hook by the door. It was July 19th, 9 a.m. sharp. The sun was already promising another scorcher, and my resolve had finally crystallized into action. I showered carefully and chose a pair of clean jeans and my best button-down shirt, the blue one David always said brought out the color of my eyes. Brandon's address was written in my careful script on a scrap of paper tucked inside my old address book. Numbers I had long since memorized, but had never used for a surprise visit. The Exxon station on Main Street sold me a tank of gas and a cup of coffee that tasted like burnt wire. But I needed the caffeine more than I needed the flavor. My hands shook slightly as I counted out the exact change, telling myself it was just my age, not my nerves. Highway 71 East cut through the familiar Ohio farmland, past silos that reached for the sky like stoic sentinels and billboards advertising wedding venues I had never heard of. The radio played a country song about family bonds that could never be broken, which felt like a particularly cruel form of cosmic mockery given my situation. 20 miles out from the city, doubt began to creep in like a dense morning fog. What on earth was I going to say when Brandon opened his door? "Surprise, honey," Your old mom got worried when you stopped returning her calls. He was a 5-year-old man, entitled to his privacy, entitled to the kind of wedding stress that didn't require detailed daily reports to his mother. But $40,000, I reasoned, bought me the right to ask a few questions. Mile markers ticked past as I rehearsed conversations in my head. Brandon explaining his silence with a series of perfectly reasonable excuses. Me, apologizing for being an overprotective, meddling mother. The two of us laughing about the silly misunderstanding while he showed me wedding photos and let me help with some last-minute preparations. That optimistic scenario felt increasingly unlikely. As the sprawling suburbs of Columbus materialized through the heat-shimmer endless subdivisions that all looked identical from the highway, Brandon lived in one of these beige, soulless complexes where young professionals paid far too much in rent for far too little space. Construction near the city limits forced the traffic into a single, crawling file, giving me more time to notice details I'd missed during my mental rehearsals. A radio advertisement for marriage counseling services, a billboard promoting intimate wedding packages, starting at $5,000 a number, that made my $40,000 sacrifice seem utterly excessive for what Brandon had claimed he wanted. The GPS voice in my truck, a recent purchase made for exactly this kind of unfamiliar navigation, guided me through subdivisions where every street looked the same. Turn right on Maple Ridge Drive, left on Oakwood Circle. Straight past clusters of identical mailboxes, until I finally reached Brandon's building. His blue sedan was in its designated parking space, which meant he was home, probably screening my calls from 20 feet away, deciding his mother wasn't worth interrupting whatever important Saturday morning activities were occupying his time. I turned off the engine and sat for a moment in the sudden, ringing silence. My heart was hammering against my ribs, just as it had 35 years ago when I'd raced David to the hospital for Brandon's birth. The same highway, the same desperate need for answers, but this time, I knew I wasn't rushing toward joy. The dashboard clock read 10:15. I'd made good time despite the construction delays and my nervous stop for gas. Through my windshield, Brandon's apartment building looked generic and unwelcoming. All beige siding and black shutters that probably cost extra, but added absolutely no character. My reflection in the rearview mirror showed a tired old woman with worry lines etched deeper than they had been just 2 months ago. I straightened my shirt, checked that my wallet was secure in my purse, and opened the door into a wave of heat that felt like opening an oven. 20 steps to the building's entrance, 2 flights of stairs to Brandon's apartment, and 1 knock on a door that might finally provide the answers to questions I'd been asking myself since May. Apartment 2B was at the end of a narrow hallway that smelled of carpet cleaner and other people's cooking. I knocked firmly, twice, then waited. I could hear the hum of air conditioning units behind thin walls and the faint sound of a television playing morning talk shows. Footsteps approached the door, then paused. The peephole went dark as Brandon checked to see who was visiting him unannounced on a Saturday morning. A long, tense moment passed before I heard the deadbolt turn. "Mommy? What are you doing here?" He opened the door just wide enough to show his face. He was still in pajama pants and an oversized t-shirt at 10-15 inches the morning. His hair was uncombed, and his expression was a mixture of surprise and something that looked suspiciously like panic. "You haven't been answering my calls," I said simply. "I was worried. I've just been so busy with..." He gestured vaguely behind him into the apartment, then seemed to remember his manners. "Come in, I guess. But I can't visit for long. Chloe and I have plans this afternoon." The apartment was smaller than I had imagined. It was an open-plan layout with stark white walls and furniture that looked expensive but deeply uncomfortable. My eyes were immediately drawn to the dozens of wedding cards scattered across the kitchen counter. They created a paper landscape of congratulations that I hadn't been invited to share. "Nice place," I said, though it felt cold and sterile, despite the air conditioning blasting against the July heat. "Very modern." Brandon moved nervously between the living room and the kitchen, straightening things that didn't need straightening. On the coffee table, Several picture frames were laid face down, as if he'd been trying to hide something just before I arrived. "Honey, I need to know about the wedding," I said, keeping my voice gentle and maternal. "When exactly is the ceremony?" He froze with his back to me, his hands gripping the edge of the kitchen counter. "Why do you need to know?" "Because I'm your mother," I said, my voice rising slightly. "Because I gave you $40,000 to make your dream wedding a reality. Because I have been patient for 2 months while you've avoided every single conversation about the details." "Mommy, please," he whispered, his shoulders slumping. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." Something in his tone, a strange mix of resignation and guilt, made my chest tighten. "Make what harder?" Brandon turned slowly to face me, and I saw tears gathering in his eyes. These weren't the practiced, manipulative tears from 2 months ago. This was something real, something devastating. "The wedding," he choked out, "was 4 days ago." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually stumbled backward, my hand reaching out to find the doorframe for support, as my brain struggled to process what he had just said. "That's not funny, Brandon. It wasn't supposed to be funny." His voice got smaller with each word. "It was just immediate family. A very small ceremony at Chloe's parents' church. We decided we wanted something intimate. Immediate family." The phrase echoed in the ringing silence of my mind, as I stared at this stranger who was wearing my son's face. Immediate family, an exclusive group that apparently didn't include the woman who had raised him, loved him, and sacrificed her entire life savings for his happiness. "You want to see the video?" Brandon held out his phone with trembling fingers. "We hired a photographer. It was really beautiful." I looked at the screen. It showed a frozen image of my son, handsome in a dark suit, standing beside his new wife Chloe, in what looked like a small, sunlit church sanctuary. His smile was radiant. Genuine, the kind of pure happiness I had dreamed of, seeing on his face as I walked him down an aisle I would now never see. No. The word came out colder than I had intended, but I couldn't summon an ounce of warmth for this moment. My son had stolen my money and my dreams, and now he had the audacity to offer me a recording of the betrayal. "Mommy, please try to understand," he pleaded. "We just didn't want a big production. All that stress, all those people to please. This was just perfect for us." Perfect. I tested the word on my tongue and found it bitter. And where exactly did my $40,000 go, if not toward this perfect, intimate wedding? Brandon's face crumpled. We needed it for other things. The deposit on this apartment, Chloe's car payment, some credit card debt. His eyes wouldn't meet mine. The wedding only cost $3,000. $3,000? I had given him enough money to buy a new car, and he'd spent it paying off his and his girlfriend's mistakes, all while feeding me lies about dream venues and crystal chandeliers. "You played me," I whispered, the realization feeling like drowning in shallow water. Everything was a lie. The venue, the stress, the desperate phone call. You just needed money, and you knew exactly which buttons to push to get it. It wasn't personal. Those 3 words, "it wasn't personal," cut deeper than any intentional cruelty ever could have. My son had manipulated me with surgical precision, using my love for him as a weapon against my own common sense, and he couldn't even admit that it was deliberate. I looked at Brandon one last time, trying to memorize the face of the person I thought I knew. He held out his phone again, still offering to show me the wedding video, still hoping he could smooth over the devastation with a shared happiness I hadn't been allowed to witness. I just shook my head once and turned toward the door. "Mommy, please don't leave like this," he called after me. But I was already walking away, stepping back out into the Ohio heat that now felt cool compared to the fire burning in my chest. The metal stairs clanged under my sensible shoes as I descended from Brandon's apartment, his voice still calling through the closed door behind me. I pushed through the building's glass entrance into the heat, which felt merciful compared to the inferno of betrayal raging inside me. My truck sat baking in the parking lot, the chrome door handle almost too hot to touch. I fumbled with my keys for what felt like a full minute before I finally managed to unlock the door and slide onto the seat, which scorched through my shirt. The engine turned over reluctantly, the air conditioning blowing out superheated air that only gradually began to cool as I sat there, motionless, staring through the windshield at nothing at all. 4 days ago, my son had gotten married 4 days ago, and I had spent those days worrying about calling to check on wedding preparations that had already happened without me. The drive home passed in a blur of disconnected fragments. The first 10 miles were spent in complete, stunned silence. My mind a blank slate except for the road ahead and the rhythmic hum of the tires on the sun-softened asphalt. The radio came on when I hit the main highway, a country song about family bonds and keeping promises. I snapped it off immediately. The quiet felt safer than lyrics that only reminded me of how thoroughly I'd been fooled. Somewhere around mile 20, I started talking to myself. 4 days ago, the words came out harsh and raw in the truck's silence. He let me worry for 4 days about a wedding that was already over. Traffic slowed to a crawl near a construction zone, forcing me to sit still with my swirling thoughts. That's when the real anger began to build. It wasn't the hot, explosive kind, but something colder, sharper, and far more dangerous. I remembered Brandon's performance in my living room back in May, how he had clutched those wedding magazines like props in a carefully rehearsed play. Every hug had been calculated. Every tear had been strategic. Every "I love you, mommy" had come with a hidden price tag. The billboard advertising dream wedding venues, "Make your day perfect," felt like a personal insult as I passed it. Going 75 in a 65 zone. My day. Brandon had stolen my day. The one moment I had been imagining since he was an 8-year-old boy, making me play bride for his action figure in the backyard. The memory, once so sweet, now tasted like poison, infected by the horrifying knowledge that he had been honing his manipulation tactics even back then. Mile marker 67 brought me close enough to Willow Creek to smell familiar things, the sweet scent of freshly cut hay from the ranches, the faint industrial smell from the factories on the edge of town, the distinctive scent of home that used to bring me such comfort. Today, it just reminded me of everything I had been willing to sacrifice for a son who saw me not as a mother to be included in his life, but as a convenient ATM. My hands ached from gripping the steering wheel too tightly, my knuckles showing white against the worn black plastic. Through the truck's windows, heat mirages made the road ahead look liquid and unreal, which seemed fitting, since nothing in my life felt solid anymore. The Willow Creek city limit sign, its green paint weathered and peeling, appeared around a gentle curve, marking the boundary of my small world. Brandon had escaped this place years ago, moving to Columbus with grand promises to visit often and call regularly. For a while, he had kept those promises. Then the visits slowly turned into requests for money, and the calls became carefully orchestrated manipulation sessions, disguised as family conversations. I pulled into my driveway and sat for another long moment, the engine ticking as it cooled. Through the windshield, I saw my mailbox, bulging with the mail I had been ignoring while I was consumed with worry about Brandon's fictional wedding crisis. Bills, advertisements, and probably more brochures from wedding venues I had contacted, when I still naively believed I was helping to plan the most important day of my son's life. The sight of that overflowing mailbox made something inside me shift. It was time to stop ignoring reality and start dealing with it. The small metal key to the mailbox felt unfamiliar in my fingers, as if I hadn't checked the mail in months instead of just a few days. Paper spilled out in a cascade of white and colored envelopes, advertisements for things I didn't need and official-looking notices that demanded my immediate attention. I gathered the pile against my chest and headed inside, grateful for the blast of cool air from an air conditioner that actually worked. My kitchen table became a sorting station, bills in one stack, junk mail in another, and the official correspondence that required careful attention in a third. Most of it was routine: the electric company, my insurance premiums, an update from Medicare, but one envelope made my blood run cold. First National Bank. Brandon's mortgage company. The words, "urgent," "payment past due," screamed from a stark red stamp across the front. It was dated July 16th. Yesterday. I tore it open with clumsy, fumbling fingers, already knowing what I would find but desperately hoping I was wrong. Account number 478291. Payment amount, $1,850. Due date, July 15th. Days overdue, 4. The same day Brandon got married. The same amount I had been sending every single month for. How long had this been going on? My home office, which occupied what used to be David's sewing room, had been converted after his death into a space for managing my finances and storing important documents. I pulled out a file folder labeled Brandon, House Help, and spread its contents across my desk like evidence in a criminal investigation. 12 months of canceled checks. Every single one, for exactly $1,850, made out to First National Bank for account number 478291. 12 months times $1,850 equals $22,200, plus the $40,000 for the wedding. My son had cost me $62,200 in 1 year. The memory came back slowly, like a half-forgotten, nightmarish dream. August of last year, Brandon arriving at my house, bubbling with excitement, holding photographs of a starter home he and Chloe had found. They were a young couple with promising careers who just needed a little help getting established. 6 months of mortgage assistance, he'd said, just while they built up their savings and got their feet under them. "You'd practically be investing in my future, Mommy?" he had argued persuasively. "When the house appreciates in value, you'll have helped us build our equity." 6 months had somehow become 12 months. 12 months had become indefinite. And not once, not a single time had Brandon ever mentioned stopping the payments, or even thanked me for the ongoing support. I spread the canceled checks across the desk chronologically, watching the progression of dates like a calendar of my own exploitation. August, September, October. Through Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, through the spring, and into the summer. Every single month, Brandon had accepted my money as if it were his birthright, never once acknowledging the sacrifice it represented for me. While I had been eating store-brand groceries and wearing the same shirts I'd owned for 5 years, my son had been living in a house that I was paying for, planning a wedding with money he'd manipulated out of me, and treating my love like a renewable resource he could tap into whenever it was convenient. The afternoon sun slanted through the office windows, casting long shadows across the undeniable evidence of my foolishness. Outside, my neighbor Helen's lawnmower started up, a familiar Saturday sound that normally brought a sense of comfort. Today, it just reminded me of how normal life had continued on while I had been living in a fantasy of being a helpful, supportive mother. A thank you card from Brandon, sent after the very first mortgage payment, sat at the bottom of the file, forgotten until now. Its message was cruelly ironic. "You're the best mommy in the world," it read. "I'll never forget this kindness." Apparently, he had forgotten it within a month, when the second payment became an expectation rather than a gift. I picked up the bank notice with its bold red paste due stamp and felt something cold and final settle in my chest. Brandon thought I'd just keep paying forever, automatically, like some kind of parental trust fund that never required maintenance or gratitude. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of sharp, cold clarity that sometimes follows emotional devastation. I woke before dawn, my mind unusually sharp, despite a restless night, and I knew exactly what needed to be done. The documents from yesterday's soul-crushing discovery lay organized on my kitchen table, like a battle plan awaiting execution. Strong coffee, a legal pad for notes, the bank's contact information, these were the tools of my liberation. At 8 a.m. sharp, I dialed First National Bank's customer service line and navigated the automated prompts until a human voice finally answered. "This is Margaret in Mortgage Services. How can I help you today?" "My name is Sarah Collins," I said, my voice steady and firm. "I have been making payments on account number 478291 for my son. But I am discontinuing that arrangement immediately." There was a pause on the other end, followed by the sound of keyboard clicking. "Mr. Collins, let me just pull up that account." "Yes, I see you're listed as an authorized payer. Are you requesting to be removed from the account?" "Exactly," I confirmed. "I want all automatic transfers stopped, and I want my name completely removed as a responsible party. This arrangement is over." "I understand, ma'am. We will need that request in writing, but I can process the removal today if you can fax us a signed letter. The account holders will be notified that they are now solely responsible for all future payments." Account holders, plural, Brandon and Chloe, living in their house, sleeping in their bed, building their life with my money, while treating me like an inconvenient but endlessly reliable ATM. "Perfect," I said. "What's your fax number?" The letter took me 20 minutes to write and rewrite until the language was unmistakably clear and final. Effective immediately. I am withdrawing all financial support for mortgage account 478291. I will make no further payments of any kind. Please remove my name as an authorized payer and direct all future communication to the account holders. I signed it with the very same pen I had used to sign Brandon's mortgage checks for 12 long months. Walking to the copy center in town gave me time to think through the implications. Brandon would receive the notice within a few days. His mortgage payment would become entirely his responsibility. Chloe would have to step up, or they would face foreclosure proceedings. Real consequences for real adults who had been playing house with someone else's money. Back home, I updated my budget for the first time in a year. Without the drain of Brandon's mortgage, I suddenly had an extra $1,850 a month. That was nearly $2,000 that would now stay in my account, earning interest, available for my own needs instead of subsidizing his lifestyle. The relief was so profound it was physical. A tension I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying for so long drained from my shoulders, my neck, my chest. For 12 months, I had been checking my account balance with a constant, low-grade anxiety, always wondering what Brandon would need next. Those days were over. My phone started ringing around 10:30 a.m. It was Brandon's number on the caller ID. He was probably panicking about the bank notice he'd just received. I looked at the phone, let it ring, and walked out to my workshop instead. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I had a morning that belonged entirely to me. The workbench held a project I had abandoned when Brandon's financial emergencies started consuming all of my time and mental energy. A beautiful jewelry box I had planned to make for David's anniversary just before he passed. It was made of cherry wood, with intricate dovetail joints and delicate brass hinges I had ordered but never installed. I picked up my smoothing plane, feeling its familiar, comforting weight in my hand. This was my time now, my money, my energy, my choice. How to spend them. Brandon could call until his phone battery died. I had better things to do than manage crises I hadn't created. Outside my workshop window, the Ohio sun climbed higher, promising another scorching day. But inside, I felt cooler and more peaceful than I had in over a year. The wood shavings curled away from my plane in perfect, fragrant ribbons, and somewhere in the distance, my phone finally stopped ringing. 1 month of freedom had completely transformed my kitchen from a neglected, forgotten space into something I could be proud of. August 20th found me halfway through painting the last cabinet door. Country music was playing softly from my old radio, and my hands were steady with the deep satisfaction of work done for myself, by myself. The fresh white paint covered years of grease stains and the faint traces of Brandon's fingerprints, erasing the last vestiges of a dependency I hadn't even realized were everywhere. The phone's harsh ring cut through a song about friends in low places. I wiped my hands on a paint-stained rag and considered letting it go to voicemail. These days, most of my calls were either from telemarketers or people I actually wanted to talk to. Brandon hadn't tried to reach me since that disastrous morning when his carefully constructed world had collapsed around his designer shoes. On the fourth ring, my curiosity won out. "Hello, Mommy? Thank goodness you answered. I've been trying to reach you for days." Brandon's voice hit my ear like fingernails on a chalkboard. But the panic was real this time. There were none of the calculated, crocodile tears he'd used before. This was the raw desperation of a man whose words tumbled over each other in a frantic rush to explain whatever crisis had finally caught up to him. "I've been busy," I said, my voice as level and calm as lake water on a windless day. "What do you need?" "The bank called this morning," he said, his voice tight with anxiety. "They said the mortgage payment is a month overdue. When are you going to pay it?" I set my paintbrush down carefully on the edge of the can, taking my time. Through the kitchen window, I could see my neighbor Helen methodically trimming her hedges, moving with the quiet precision of a woman who understood the value of maintaining what belonged to her. "Is that so?" "Mommy, they're talking about foreclosure proceedings. We could lose everything, everything." The word tasted bitter even from his mouth. I could hear it. Everything he had built on my money, everything he had just assumed would continue to flow from my account like water from a faucet he never had to bother to maintain. "When are you going to pay it?" he repeated, his voice climbing toward that hysterical pitch that used to trigger all my protective instincts. Now, it just sounded like noise. "I'm not." The silence on the other end of the line stretched on long enough for me to pick up my brush and add another careful, even stroke to the cabinet door. Quality work, I thought, required patience, attention to detail, and a commitment to seeing things through properly. "What do you mean you're not?" he finally sputtered. "I mean exactly that. I'm not paying it today. I'm not paying it tomorrow. I'm not paying it ever again. But Mommy, you always help me. You promised you'd always be there for me." The manipulation was so naked now, so painfully obvious, that I wondered how I could have ever fallen for it. Brandon's toolkit hadn't changed. The same emotional blackmail, the same appeals to promises I'd never actually made, the same entitled assumption that my love meant unlimited financial liability. "I helped the son I thought I had," I said, my voice cold and clear. "That person, it seems, doesn't exist." His sobbing started then, the full theatrical production that used to melt my resolve like ice cream in the summer heat. Now, it just sounded hollow and rehearsed. "Please, we'll lose everything. The house, our credit, our future. Then I guess your family will have to handle it." "Family? We're family." "Family doesn't lie about weddings, Brandon," I said sharply. "Family doesn't use love as currency. Family doesn't exclude the very people who sacrifice everything for them." "But what are we supposed to do? Chloe's still looking for work, and I can barely cover our groceries." "What you should have done from the very beginning," I said. "Figure it out yourselves." I could hear him hyperventilating on the other end. The frantic, gulping breaths of someone who realizes their safety net has just been permanently cut away. For a fleeting moment, I felt a tiny flicker of something that might have been sympathy. Then I remembered the wedding video he had so casually offered to show me. The sheer, thoughtless cruelty of that gesture, and my resolve hardened into something unbreakable. "Mommy, please," he whimpered. "I don't understand how you can just abandon me like this." "Abandon you?" The irony was so thick, I could have spread it on toast. You abandoned me first, Brandon. At an altar I never got to see. Surrounded by a family that apparently didn't include the woman who raised you. The line went quiet, except for the sound of his harsh, desperate breathing. Outside, a lawnmower started up somewhere down the street. Normal people doing normal things on a Tuesday afternoon in August, maintaining their own lives without needing anyone else's permission or financial support. We're family, he whispered one last time, all the fight gone from his voice. No, I said softly. We're strangers who happen to share DNA. I hung up the phone while he was still crying and stood in my quiet kitchen for a long moment, listening to the echo of my own words. The radio was still playing some country song about standing your ground when the world tries to push you around. I picked up my paintbrush and hummed along, applying another perfect, even coat to the cabinet that would never again bear the fingerprints of manipulation. The kitchen cabinet gleamed with fresh paint by 4 p.m. A small masterpiece of careful craftsmanship that belonged entirely to me. No one had demanded it, scheduled it, or made its completion conditional on their approval. I had simply decided that my kitchen deserved better. And now, it had what it deserved. Cleaning my brushes at the sink became a meditation on completeness. The white paint swirled away under the hot water, leaving the bristles clean and ready for the next project. The bedroom, maybe, or the guest bathroom that hadn't seen a guest in 2 years. Projects I could actually afford now that my money was staying in my account, where it belonged. The radio DJ's cheerful voice cut through my quiet satisfaction. 4:15 on this beautiful Tuesday afternoon. Temperatures holding steady at 92 degrees. 4:15. Brandon's panic-stricken call already felt like ancient history, like someone else's drama that had absolutely nothing to do with the peaceful woman washing paintbrushes in her own sink. My bank statement lay on the counter where I'd left it that morning, open to a set of numbers that still surprised me. Balance. $4,470. 2 months ago, that number would have been closer to $2,600 after Brandon's mortgage payment had disappeared into his account. The difference represented so much more than money. It represented choice, freedom, and the revolutionary concept of actually keeping what I had earned. I made myself a sandwich with real deli turkey instead of the cheap store-brand lunch meat I'd been buying to accommodate Brandon's endless financial drain. The taste of real food, purchased without a shred of guilt or calculation, was a startling reminder of what normal people took for granted every day. My pension covered my needs. It had always covered my needs. It was Brandon's needs that had been the expensive part. The rest of the afternoon stretched out before me, like a personal invitation to possibilities I had long forgotten existed. I could read a book without anxiously checking my phone every 10 minutes. I could start another home improvement project without worrying about having enough money for materials. I could even finally plan that fishing trip to Lake Erie I'd been postponing for over a year. My notebook, the one where I used to meticulously track Brandon's payment schedules, now held entirely different lists. New refrigerator, $800. Deck repairs, $400. Weekend trip to Cincinnati to visit old work friends, $300. These were numbers that added up to a life lived for the person who was actually earning the money, instead of the person who was just spending it. The appliance store answered on the second ring. Thompson's Appliances. This is Maria speaking. Hello, this is Sarah Collins. I'd like to schedule the delivery of a refrigerator for this Friday. Certainly, Miss Collins. What model were you interested in? I looked at my old refrigerator, which was limping along on borrowed time, with a freezer that had to be manually defrosted every single month. The best one you have that costs under $1,000, I said with a smile. The best one, not the cheapest one, not the one that would leave more money for Brandon's next emergency. The best one, because I deserved to have appliances that worked properly, and I could finally afford them. By 5:30, I had a delivery scheduled, a fishing trip planned for the upcoming weekend, and a contractor's estimate requested for the deck repairs. My calendar, which had once been held hostage by Brandon's constant crises, now belonged entirely to me. The freedom was almost disorienting after months of living in a constant state of reaction. Grilling a steak on the back porch while the sun painted the sky in shades of fiery orange felt like a luxury beyond description. Real beef, thick cut and properly marbled, seasoned with spices I'd bought without even checking the price. The sizzle of the meat on the hot metal grates sounded like prosperity. Like a woman finally taking care of herself the way she deserved. My neighbor Helen appeared at the fence that separated our yards, a beer in her hand and a curious expression on her face. "You're looking mighty content over there, Sarah." "It's a good day for it," I replied, flipping the steak with practiced ease. "Beautiful evening. Good food, no complaints. Haven't seen Brandon's car around lately? Wedding preparations keeping him busy?" I had never told Helen the truth about Brandon's marriage, partly out of embarrassment and partly because it just hadn't seemed important. Now, it felt like ancient history. Someone else's story that had no bearing on my current reality. "Brandon's handling his own affairs these days," I said calmly. "I'm focusing on mine." Helen nodded approvingly. "Probably healthy. Can't live your kids' lives for them forever." Forever. The words settled over me like the cool evening breeze, carrying the scent of grilling meat and freshly cut grass. Forever was how long I had been prepared to subsidize Brandon's lifestyle. Forever was how long he had planned to let me. Thank goodness forever had ended when it did. My steak was perfect pink in the middle, charred on the edges, exactly the way I liked it. With no one else's preferences to consider, I ate slowly, savoring each bite, and the complete and total absence of the phone anxiety that had plagued my life for months. No missed calls, no emergency texts, no manufactured crisis demanding my immediate financial intervention. As twilight deepened into a soft evening, I heard a car door slam somewhere down the street. For just a second, my muscle memory made me wonder if Brandon was coming to continue our conversation in person. Then I realized something profound. I didn't care. Let him come. This was my house, my porch, my life, and my decision. Whatever happened next, I would handle it from a position of strength, rather than manipulation, of clarity, rather than confusion, of self-respect, rather than guilt. The difference felt like waking up from a long, expensive, and terrible dream. The car door I had heard, it turned out, belonged to Brandon after all. At 6:30, he appeared around the corner of my house with Chloe trailing behind him like an uncomfortable shadow. They approached my back porch, where I sat, finishing my coffee, moving with the hesitant, uncertain steps of people who knew they were not welcome. I didn't stand up. I didn't invite them to sit. I just watched them cross my yard with the detached interest of a woman observing strangers navigate her property. "I figured you'd show up eventually," I said. My voice even. Brandon looked terrible. His eyes were red-rimmed and desperate, and he was wearing the same clothes he'd probably slept in. Chloe kept her distance, looking clearly uncomfortable with whatever desperate plan had brought them to my doorstep. The golden hour light cast harsh shadows across their faces, emphasizing the strain of people who were finally facing consequences they had never expected. "Mommy, we need to talk. This is serious." "Everything's always serious with you, Brandon," I replied calmly. "That's how I know it usually isn't." He stepped closer to the porch, his hands clasped in front of him, as if he were praying to a deity he'd never believed in, until this very moment. "We're going to lose the house. Everything we've worked for." "Everything I worked for, you mean?" Chloe finally found her voice. "Mrs. Collins, we really appreciate everything you've done for us, and we understand." "Do you?" I cut her off, my eyes studying the young woman who had married my son in secret while living in a house I was paying for. "Because that wedding you had suggested otherwise. That celebration you held without me suggested a complete and total lack of appreciation." Brandon dropped to his knees in the grass, a gesture so theatrical it would have been laughable if it weren't so utterly pathetic. "Please, Mommy, I'm begging you. We can't survive without your help." Chloe looked mortified. but dutifully knelt beside him, following his lead in this desperate performance. From my elevated position on the porch, I looked down at them, both literally and figuratively. Two grown adults, reduced to begging for money from a woman they had deliberately and callously excluded from their lives. "You created a family without me," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Now, you need to learn to survive as that family." "But you're my mother." Brandon's voice cracked with the kind of raw pain that used to move mountains in my heart. Now, it just sounded like the delayed recognition of consequences. "You're supposed to help me. Mothers help their sons." "I don't know what you are anymore," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "But you're not that." Chloe tried a different approach, her business background peeking through the awkwardness of the situation. "Ma'am, maybe we could work out some kind of payment plan? Something manageable for everyone? The plan," I stated, "is that you handle your own responsibilities. Like adults, like the married couple you chose to become without consulting anyone else." Brandon played his final card with the desperation of someone who had absolutely nothing left to lose. "What would Dad think of you abandoning me like this?" The mention of David, my David, who had loved Brandon unconditionally and trusted me to do the same, hit exactly the wrong nerve at exactly the wrong moment. I stood up for the first time since they had arrived, feeling a core of steel replace whatever softness might have remained in my voice. "Your father," I said, my voice carrying across the yard like a final judgment that had been years in the making, "would be ashamed of what you've become. He would be disgusted by how you used love as a weapon and family as a bank account." Brandon fell silent, finally understanding that he had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The golden light was fading now, leaving them in shadows that seemed appropriate for people who had chosen to live in the dark corners of manipulation and deceit. $22,000 for your mortgage, $40,000 for your fake wedding emergency, $62,000 you took from a woman who loved you enough to give you everything. My voice was a low, steady condemnation. "And not once, not a single time did you think to include me in the life I was financing." The evening cicadas started their chorus, filling the heavy silence that stretched between us like a chasm that could never be bridged. Brandon remained on his knees, crying real tears for perhaps the first time in years. Chloe stared at the ground, probably calculating how many months of her own salary I had unknowingly contributed to their lifestyle. "Get off my property," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. "Both of you." They rose, without a word of protest. Two people who had finally run out of arguments, manipulations, and appeals to emotions they had never truly understood. Brandon looked back once as they reached the corner of the house, but I had already settled back into my chair, the master of my domain once again. Their car started up in the driveway, its headlights sweeping across my yard as they backed out and drove away. The sound of their engine faded into the quiet Ohio evening, leaving behind the one thing I'd been missing for over a year: peace. Tomorrow, I decided, I would start painting the bedroom. Another project for myself. By myself? But tonight, I would just enjoy the silence of a woman who had finally learned the difference between being a mother and being a fool. The cicadas sang their approval, and somewhere in the distance, life continued at its own pace, finally free from the manufactured emergencies of people who had confused love with money and family with exploitation. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.